English translation 465th contact. Wednesday, 7th May 2008, 15:48 hours.
Hello, Ptah. Welcome and my greetings, dear friend. I had to finish the job with Helga first.
I also greet you, Edward, my friend. The reason why I am back so soon finds its reasons in the trial translation that was made for the Goblet of the Truth. First of all, when I saw the work before it was actually finished, I only paid attention to the way the English language was kept. In the meantime, however, I have studied the translation by the translation company and found that the things of it are not acceptable with regard to the wrong choice of words and the form of the old language. First of all, I only looked at the British English form and found certain errors in the choice of words and the form of the language which I considered to be acceptable insofar as the errors would be corrected. But now that I have gone through everything in detail, I must say that, at least in the old language form, there is too much wrong, especially because the pronouns are not correct, which is not acceptable. If the person who has translated the whole thing is not sufficiently proficient in the German language to grasp the differences between the old and the present language form, then another person must be found who is able to understand everything in the right language form and translate it correctly. However, it is necessary that you discuss and work through everything in detail with the translator person so that no further mistakes of the same or similar kind occur. It would be very unfortunate and time-consuming if you had to put the translations into the true language form yourself, besides the fact that there would be a lot of unwanted expenses because everything would have to be worked through specially.
Then I will phone Bernadette today, so she can get in touch with the translation company that did the test translation. It is an Englishman who lives in Hong Kong. Let us see what comes out of it. I also think that the whole thing is not acceptable in the present wise. If the translator of the German language is not powerful enough to translate the old wise of speaking in the true form, then we should really be looking for another translator. But I like to be surprised, because perhaps it is just a misunderstanding of pronouns, so the translator could do everything true if they had the necessary information. However, there are also various terms that have been translated incorrectly and that would need to be corrected. But that would not be so bad, because we could give the necessary instructions in this respect.
In any case, this translation of this kind which is presented here is not useful, because it really does not meet the value of the work enough in terms of the pronouns. It is really very faulty. And if it should turn out that the translator is not able to do everything in a true wise, then you will have to look for someone else. In any case, it would be important to be able to discuss everything in detail face-to-face with the person concerned.
Yes, I agree. I just talked to Helga about it and also corrected these pages a bit. See for yourself, it is really unpleasant.
Ptah reads.
It really is, yes. I see that the same errors are marked here as I found them myself. Really unfortunate. What is also awkward about this is that you cannot clarify everything face-to-face with the translator because he lives in Hong Kong.
Yes, I know. But let us wait and see what Bernadette can arrange with the translation company. Next Friday, we will surely know more.
Then I will check with you on Saturday to see what is happening.
Are you coming back here?
That remains to be seen.
So it is not definite yet?
No.
Look, a reader's phone call from a man named Wu Chengdang in China. He speaks German and reads our bulletins on the internet and asks if hashish and marijuana are harmful or not. With your daughter Simya Se, as well as Quetzal, and also with you, I have often talked about the consequences of intoxicating drugs, so also about hashish and marijuana, which are considered harmless by many stupid politicians. although these drugs also cause great psychological, consciousness, and brain-based damage, as you always explained. However, the advocates of these so-called harmless drugs are not influenced by this. I wonder whether these fools are not themselves addicted to these drugs, and whether their brains have already shrunk, which is what these intoxicating drugs do.
That is probably not the case, except maybe in a few cases. The stupidity of the advocates of hashish and marijuana lies in the fact that they do not know the truth about the harmful effects of these drugs on health. Marijuana and hashish are very strong psychodrugs, which means that they damage the psyche but also cause severe brain shrinkage, the consequences of which are, among other things, chronically progressive and have a degenerative effect on the brain. This means that there is a loss in relation to previously acquired abilities of the perception, of the thinking, and cognition. The loss of these cognitive abilities increasingly causes disturbances with regard to memory, but also with regard to intelligence and judgment. Connected with this is a change in the personality structure, as well as in the orientation ability and the social and activity aspects. Ultimately, psychotic factors such as hallucinations and delusions, and possibly also epilepsy, develop. And the damage that these drugs also cause is very great, with psychological damage and brain shrinkage being just two of the various health impairments.
Thank you. So, in other words, eventually dementia develops, something like mental retardation, if I may say so.
That is rightly said.
I will publish our brief conversation in response in one of the next bulletins. Concerning the bird epidemic, has something new come up? We are not hearing anything about it at the moment. Has it all calmed down, or is it the calm before the storm? Yes, you once said that something like this happened in 1918, when the Spanish flu began to spread and killed many millions of humans. Yes, this so-called flu was also a kind of bird epidemic, which mutated such that it spread to humans, if I understood you correctly when we talked about it once.
It is of correctness that the so-called Spanish flu was a mutated bird epidemic. And indeed, there was the phenomenon that there was a calm before the storm, as you say, before the epidemic really broke out on a large scale. However, as far as the bird epidemic as it exists today is concerned, there is not yet any indication that an epidemic or even a pandemic is imminent. Because first, the relevant mutations of the pathogens that cause the disease would have to be created, which could be dangerous to humans on a large or very large scale.
But many Earthlings will be reassured by that, and I can use your answer for a reader's question. But regarding Myanmar and Burma, you said that according to your first investigations, more than 100,000 humans lose their lives. Is there an exact figure?
According to our investigations, the direct impact of the Cyclone 164-611 alone will cause the loss of human lives. However, the military junta will deny the truth about this and minimize it very much. Our investigations also revealed that the regime does not allow any or only sparse foreign aid for the suffering population. On the one hand, in order to favorably present itself to the population, and on the other hand, because it fears that the USA and other states might interfere in political and economic affairs and perhaps remain in the country. For Burma and its population, a very difficult time will follow, because the destruction by the cyclone will be very large, and apart from the many dead, there will be also approximately 2.8 million homeless people, which is, however, indicated by the military junta also with lower numbers, as also concerning the dead ones. The catastrophe will, however, become even more widespread, because food, water, and medicine will become very scarce. In addition to the fact that diseases and epidemics threaten to break out, If relief organizations of other states do not bring the necessary relief into the country, which, at least for the time being, will be prevented on a large scale by the military junta. This can mean that many thousands of humans will die afterwards from diseases, hunger, and epidemics. But what will happen in this respect? We will have to clarify first, when we take up the matter further, so that I can only later say exactly how many deaths will really be caused.
Yes, the foresight work is quite tedious and time-consuming, as Ketzel once said. But you do not have to tell me further details of what will ultimately result in terms of the dead once you have created final clarifications. What you have already told me is quite enough.
This is indeed the case with the predictions, and besides, we are doing the whole of the further clarifications only to get more precise information with regard to our earthly time documents.
I know, but with regard to Burma, once again the system of the Nokodemion multinational peacekeeping forces would be in demand here. But it will be a long time before such troops become reality and intervene where need, peace, and freedom demand it. But as long as the USA still plays world police and breaks into foreign countries with war and destruction and spreads affliction, death, misery, and war crimes, for which the world generally still shouts pro and hurrah, so long there will be no multinational peace combat troops. And when I consider the ridiculousness that, I think it was 1946 after the Nuremberg trial, the victorious states USA, Soviet Union, England, and France decided that every warlike attack on a foreign country is considered a war crime, then my hat goes up in my face. What else did the USA do in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, and in Iraq, etc., where they invaded by war and spread death, corruption, rape, torture, and destruction, and thus committed war crimes? But the world is not talking about this, just as the USA is also not being held accountable for it.
Unfortunately, it is really the case that Earth humans and their governments are not concerned about this, but are still helping the USA for their war crimes.
Just as the Dalai Lama is being hailed and given unjustified aid by all the world's innocent people, while China and its people are being rammed to the ground. Of course, it is no coincidence that there is such an evil sentiment against China, if one thinks of all the horrors that have been repeatedly brought to light in China since time immemorial. But the fact that the Dalai Lama's criminal political machinations are being praised unscrupulously and against all existing truth of his evil deeds is unjust.
Earth humans neither want to see the truth nor know or accept it, because they prefer to be beguiled and deceived by false words of hypocrites. But speaking of China, on the 12th of May there will be a major earthquake of magnitude 8 in the province of Sichuan in China, but it will be followed by other strong quakes that will last for weeks and will again cause death and great destruction. Millions of homes, structures, and buildings will be completely destroyed within 2 weeks of the first quake, when major aftershocks will destroy another 500,000 or so homes. But the aftershocks will not bring China any peace later either, as they will continue into July. Small earthquakes and seaquakes are also occurring in other countries, such as Greece, but Japan is hit by a strong quake of magnitude 7.2 in mid-June, which claims a number of lives. Furthermore, in China, huge landslides and mountain slopes are causing many rivers to be dammed to form large lakes, creating new dangers because if the dams of the stopped-up rivers were to break, there would be another enormous catastrophe. However, the Chinese government will summon the military to create artificial drains through the dams, which will allow the huge masses of water to flow in a controlled manner. However, this will be accompanied by great difficulties and severe disruption caused by heavy rains, causing rivers to overflow their banks, causing major floods and landslides, and putting hundreds of thousands of people to flight. There will also be more deaths and destruction. Through the direct effects of the main earthquake alone, 117,214 humans will lose their lives, and over 16 million will be homeless. Of course, it is the same in China as in Burma and other states, where there is no precise population monitoring, that the government will set the death toll much lower than it actually is, because just like the military junta in Myanmar, with which China sympathizes, the Chinese government is also interested in playing down the actual impact of the disaster. As with the cyclone in Burma, many of the dead were no longer found. So it will be in China after the series of earthquakes that will continue well into July. Then it should also be mentioned that another unusual feature is that on 26th May next, a U.S. probe will land on Mars without any problems and send amazingly good images from the planet's surface to Earth, which will also reveal the presence of ice. Another catastrophe of exceptional form is caused by rainstorms in Colombia, where flooding caused by rain has flooded large areas and also triggered large landslides. There will also be great damage and deaths. In those days, according to our further investigations, unusually heavy rains and hailstorms will also begin in various European countries. For example, in Belgium, where there will be such extraordinary rainstorms as have never before occurred in this country in living memory. But also Italy and Germany, especially Baden-Württemberg, will be hit by similarly heavy rainstorms, where also deaths will be reported, while in other countries such as Switzerland, France, Spain, Austria, etc., there will be common storms with heavy damage. The USA will also be affected, with unusual floods and inundations of great proportions, as well as various dam bursts on the Mississippi River, which will have devastating effects and destruction.
Despite this disaster in Burma, fools and lunatics, including many scientists, still maintain that such events are perfectly normal and also not due to climate change, and that Earth's humans are certainly not to blame for the natural disasters.
An unparalleled know-it-all from those who are addicted to being of low intelligentum and hopeless self-opinionatedness.
I think so too. But do you have anything else about extraordinary predictions? And what interests me is the U.S. presidential primary. Who will win the race, Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton? Who I think is extremely might-hungry. Do you have anything to say about this yet?
Yes. The Democratic primary will be won by Barack Obama. And what you say about Hillary Clinton is true. She is an extraordinarily might-hungry woman who will not give up until the very end, but will still suffer defeat. If she really came to power, the United States and many countries of the earth would face a rather unpleasant future. However, humankind can count itself lucky that the power is not placed in the hands of this woman. Further, it results in England that first scientific steps are taken and first attempts are made to create chimera embryos, but at first only in the test tube, which will be extended in the far future to the real chimera production.
In this sense, an organism or a single drive is to be understood which is built up from genetically different cells. That is to say, a hybrid being, if I am of correctness, an organism which is built up from human and animal cells, for example. Yes, chimeras are known from mythology, such as fauns, mermaids, and centaurs, etc.
This is the meaning of my statement. It is about human genome and animal cells, which is created in England. However, the products are only to be kept alive for 14 days and then killed off again, but work is also continuing secretly, and the 14-day period will be far exceeded in the near future, as we have discovered. So the scientists will not stick to this regulation for a while, so sooner or later, at least at first secretly, but later openly, real chimeras will be bred and brought to life.
If I am not mistaken, chimera breeding is a form of cloning.
This is indeed the case because it is a cloning process, because according to the natural laws of nature, no such beings were created.
Then, as clones, such beings should actually be capable of reproduction, or, as opposed to the usual crossbreeding of different species.
Chimeras are usually capable of reproduction.
Other than our mythologies that speak of chimeras, are there actually such creatures on other worlds?
They do exist, but we know of only one planet where such beings exist.
On my great journey, I was not able to observe any. But it would be very interesting if I could see them. Apart from the Salbiden with their reddish shining eyes which fly through the air and also sat on the ridge of our center roof, I have not seen any.
The Salbiden are not chimeras, but floating, as the term Salbiden expresses. They are purely human life forms and float through the air by levitation, but also walk on the ground normally. If the opportunity arises, I will take you to a world where several species of chimeras live. That should be possible during my vacation time.
I would be delighted. But where do these beings exist? In your space-time structure or in ours?
They live in your space-time structure, on a world in the spiral galaxy which you call Galaxy NGC 2770, which is about 12,012,000,000 years old. This is the spiral galaxy we came to on your great journey through a time jump of about 90 million years back into the past, where you could observe the huge explosion of a supernova at the outer edge of the galaxy. At that time, however, there were not yet higher life forms in that galaxy.
And that is where it is supposed to go back in time again. Yes, the supernova no longer exists, but you may still be able to see its most distant effects. That supernova would have been something I could have put in writing after I returned from the great journey, like so many other things. Yes, but you did not want me to call up all my observations and experiences from your memories and write them down. But it will be a special experience for me to be able to fly with you again into that area and observe the chimeras. It would also be interesting if I could talk to one of the life forms, because I assume that they are able to speak. But how long does it take to bridge the 90 million light years and return here?
We will only need a short time for the undertaking, although the question is how long you will be able to speak to one or more of the beings. Communication will be possible through our language converters. But it is supposed to be a purely private enterprise without you describing our trip. I have my reasons for this, as well as after your great journey, why you were not allowed to write down everything you observed and experienced.
I see, but according to your wishes, my friend. Of course I will stick to it. Perhaps it would be interesting to explain officially what a supernova is for those interested in the conversation reports, because there are certainly many humans who have no idea what it is. Surely the humans of the Earth are not concerned with it in large measure.
That, my friend, you can do just as well as I can.
I do not know much about it because I am not an astrophysicist. But a supernova, that is to say supernova, is when a sun develops into such, and then goes into a primordial explosion, producing and releasing a gigantic mass of X-ray radiation. Although it is a completely natural cosmic process, it can also trigger a huge catastrophe, especially if regions with life-bearing planets are affected. A supernova produces heavy chemical elements, which create new forms, such as new planets, and from which new forms of life also emerge through the following processes. The explosion of a supernova occurs when a massive sun or star has used up its nuclear fuel and collapses according to its own gravity and becomes so dense that an ultra-dense mass is created. This process triggers an enormous shock wave that penetrates to the outside and propagates through the outer gas layers of the collapsed star, causing the mass or star to explode into pieces, which is the first to release enormous amounts of X-rays. This is actually the most important thing I know about a supernova. On the whole, I have never dealt with astronomy, but only within the framework of general knowledge.
That should also be enough to explain it.
One more question. Are there any other things to mention regarding that which is unusual in terms of predictions?
There are. But first allow me to ask a question on my part. You promised me some time ago that you would explain to me today what the original reason was for the appearance of Nokodemion. You said that it was so determined by the laws of the creation. We, our spiritual leaders, and so naturally also I, are not familiar with such a law because we cannot retrieve information from Nokodemion's memory banks. If you can give me some clarification now? If it cannot be opened, then?
It is not a secret, even if it has never been talked about, because no one ever asked about it, except you. But since your question is given, I will also answer it.
I see. Your principle is that you usually only talk about things that you are asked about or that inevitably arise from a conversation or in terms of a discussion related to the teaching or anything else.
I think I can answer that openly now that a question has come from you. A question about something specific is always the first signal to talk openly about something. Because a clear, rational, and understandable question, which does not take anything out of context, always indicates that a point of interest and understanding for a corresponding answer has been reached. So, Nokodemion's memory bank shows that his special position of being able to return his spirit form from the plane Arahat Athersata back to the material world was an absolute exception, which was not repeated with any other spirit form or will ever be repeated with any other spirit form. The reason for this is that, according to a law of creation, a spirit form intended for humans has the duty to create the first knowledge and the resulting wisdom for the human life forms, from which they can learn fundamentally. The knowledge or the resulting wisdom of this spirit form is derived from a foundation created by creation, which is anchored in the Pei-Tahli level and is transmitted through all levels down to the level of Arahat Athersata, from which the spirit form then draws the knowledge. Through a learning process of the consciousness of the respective human being, fed by the energy and power of the spirit form, the respective human being takes on his self-imposed duty as a proclaimer of the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the spirit, the teaching of the life, voluntarily and on his own initiative, and learns, and learns, and learns, in order to then convey and pass on his acquired knowledge or wisdom to other humans and their peoples. And only because of this it is possible that a spirit form of a human being, like the one of Nokodemion, could change back and forth between the level of Arahat Athersata and the material universe belt, that is to say the material world, in order to finally remain in the material level again, and to call a prophet, that is to say a prophesying line, into being through the spirit form and different personalities. The reason for the sevenfold prophetic line, which finally came into being on Earth, is based on the former peoples of Nokodemion, whom he created and called together, but who partly caused a lot of trouble and contributed to the fact that Nokodemion's spirit form returned from the level of Arahat Athersata to restore order. And since a small part of the farthest and most distant descendants of Nokodemion's peoples spread out on different worlds and different galaxies, and ultimately also on Earth, and also caused mischief there, he took the advice of the Arahat Athersata level to work again and again over billions of years as a proclaimer or prophet of the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, the teaching of the truth among the fallible on many worlds in many galaxies. This is how the prophetic lineage ultimately came about on Earth as well, but here, by way of exception, in a sevenfold form, which is familiar to you. This sevenfold line, however, only came about because on Earth the last utterance takes place in the form of the Nokodemion spirit form, because after that it no longer appears on Earth. And what more is to be said about this? I can explain as follows, that a form appears in the universe of creation and takes over the duty of a herald or prophet is determined by a law of creation, namely that all consciously evolving life forms, exactly the human life forms, are imparted a basic stock of knowledge and wisdom from which they can learn and evolve. If this were not so, and if such a proclaimer would not appear at a very early time, who brings and teaches a certain knowledge capable of evolution, as it is given by the high spirit levels of the level Arahat Athersata, and from this to the proclaimer and spread by him, then there would be no evolution of consciousness. The knowledge taught by the proclaimer is taken up by the humans and passed on orally, but it also spreads further and further throughout the entire universe, through the collective subconsciousness forms, and through other vibrations, so that the development of knowledge and wisdom, once started, is not to be stopped again. The same principle prevails in all material universes, that is to say, creations, because in every universe of creation it results, as it has also resulted in our universe, that originally a universal proclaimer appears, as it was also Nokodemion, in order to bring first knowledge and wisdom, which humans can then further develop universe-wide independently and bring to the actual evolution of consciousness. Every material universe produces only one such herald, who can be male or female, so that a herald is not bound to a certain sex. Apart from this universal herald, who despite his great knowledge and consciousness is always only a simple man and never deviates from his modesty, there are, of course, among all peoples on all worlds inhabited by human life forms in all galaxies of the universe, also again and again, humans who appear as prophets or proclaimers and wise men from among the peoples. These are the ones who either teach the real, traditional teachings of the universal prophet, if they have the knowledge of them, or, if they do not know the teachings of their universal preacher, create their own teachings and spread them among the peoples. In doing so, however, they then usually teach a great many erroneous things and often life-despising unworthiness from these self-created teachings, from which, as a rule, untruthful religions, philosophies, and ideologies arise. This in turn results in sex, as well as hatred, revenge, retribution, and war, along with many other evils, which then spread among humans worldwide and create unkindness, discord, unfreedom and disharmony, misery, quarreling, jealousy, greed, addiction, vice, dishonor, dishonorableness, falsehood, disrespect, dishonesty, and many other ugly things.
And that is so determined by a corresponding law of creation in every material universe of creation?
Yes, that is according to the information in Nokodemion's memory banks, according to the knowledge from the plane Arahat Athersata.
Since we cannot penetrate Nokodemion's memory banks, this is completely new knowledge for us, which we have to work on and complete. Thank you for your explanation and execution, which is immeasurably valuable for us, but which is also very valuable for the Earth humans. It is safe to assume that this information is not secret?
It is not secret, no. But you should know that I do not want any thanks, because I am only doing my duty, as you are also doing yours. Tell me what will happen to whether the donations will raise the necessary capital for the translation of the Goblet of the Truth. Or will it be...
You should not worry about that unnecessarily, because the necessary financial means will be at your disposal, even for the printing of the English edition.
You say that so surely.
The reason for this is that I have made a foresight in this respect.
I see. And did you perhaps have your hands in it with corresponding impulses and so forth?
No, because such an action on my part would not be worthy of the right and also of your work. As the title Goblet of the Truth says, this is also connected with honesty in every respect, which does not tolerate any kind of influence, and also not through impulses from our side in order to induce Earth humans to donate. As the book makes clear, freedom must also prevail, and this also applies to donations, and therefore only voluntary donations for the translation and subsequent English-German printing of the book, and this from Earth humans who are sincerely interested in it and also honestly connected with the mission. And such Earth humans, dear friend, already exist on Earth many more than you know and all group members really know. So you should not be surprised that the donations for the work, Goblet of the Truth, are flowing abundantly, so that it can really be translated first into the British English language and then also printed and distributed bilingually. And in this connection, I would like to mention another time that this work is the most valuable book ever written for Earth humans in terms of the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the life, although it must also be explained that this includes all your other books, writings, articles, and the spiritual teaching that you have written and through which the work Goblet of the Truth is only completed.
Thank you for your words. I really would not have liked you to do anything with impulses to encourage the donations. Thank you, Ptah, dear friend. But tell me, could you possibly ask the High Council about the English translation of the Goblet of the Truth, how we should handle it? It might be a good idea to seek their advice.
I understand your words very well, but it will still arouse adversaries and envious people who will condemn everything. Your idea with the High Council is good, so I will make an effort. However, it will take some time, so I will only be able to give you its advice between the 13th and 15th of June.
That should also be soon enough then. But the adversaries, however, will have to be reckoned with. There will also be new hatred and new slander against me.
That is unfortunately not to be dismissed. But what is urgent in my thoughts is not these things that you will very well know how to master, but it is Guido's new book. You should seriously talk to him that he will finish his important work in the near future, otherwise his energies and powers will not be sufficient to complete it.
Yes, you told me that before, but you did not tell me to tell him according to your words. It would be really important that he finishes the book. I know, because it contains a lot of important things concerning the universe of creation and the creational laws and recommendations, which are not described in any execution, as it is the case in his book.
That is why I also think it is very important that he completes the book. But his energies and powers and his time are dwindling, so he should be very careful to finish his work now.
This is clear and plain, but unfortunately it is also inevitable, as it is equally inevitable for me and for all humans.
It is the passage of all life. But this does not mean that recorded obligations may be neglected, as is unfortunately the case with many Earth humans, because they prefer to indulge in pleasures rather than fulfill their duties, which leaves them without initiative. But this has nothing to do with Guido, because it is not possible to speak of him in this way. Quite the contrary, which is why I suggest that you also talk to him in such a way that in future he will stop his monthly 8-hour work at the center, as well as all the correction work on writings, articles, books, etc. He should also not make any further efforts regarding his lectures, but leave these duties to the younger members. If he does have something that he wants to present, it should be arranged in the same way that you think it is your own, by having another group member present what you have to present. 12 sets of private information.
Guido's not going to be happy to hear that. And whether he will also follow it, that must be left to him alone.
That is true, because we two can only give advice, but what is done is not for us to decide.
This is the case with every human being, because everyone has to decide for himself what he does and how he does it, how he behaves and how he thinks and feels and how he is healthy and so on. But what worries me besides Guido is Engelbert. Can you tell me?
His illness has deteriorated to a state that does not allow for any improvement, but is getting worse and cannot be stopped. I do not want to say any more about this openly, because I only want to explain the rest to you. whereby I also do not want to withhold some things from you concerning Guido and Engelbert and their state of health and the rest of their lives. What I have to say, however, I do in such a way that it is only for your information.
Thank you, Ta. The whole thing is not pleasant, but you cannot change facts, which I know only too well. Somehow you just have to deal with it, even if it is always very difficult. That is also the case with you, I suppose.
We too are just simple humans, and cannot change facts, and so certain things, like the ones I just mentioned, are not easy for us to deal with either, and always meet each other.
Exactly. So you also have to deal with your thoughts and feelings like we do, even if it is often very difficult. But now a question regarding the Goblet of the Truth, or its English translation. Is it possible that I can reach you at any time via Florina, or directly when things need to be clarified?
That is unquestionable. But if I come here for that reason, it will only be for a short time and unofficially, so that no other things can be discussed that are intended for the public. If there are any problems that you have to discuss with me, the necessary conversations will be short and private. Unfortunately, I have a lot of work to do in the near future, which I cannot postpone, so I can come here not for official, but only for very short, unofficial visits and discussions. I cannot come back for an open discussion until the 20th, 21st, or 22nd of June. But if you need my advice on the translation of the Goblet of the Truth, you can call Florina and tell her that I should come here for a short time, which can really only be for a few minutes at a time. But now the time is advanced, so I have to leave again. Goodbye and farewell, dear friend, but thank you again for your explanations and remarks, which are important to us.
A pity, but probably cannot be changed. You are welcome. You stay well also. Salome and goodbye.